Good day and welcome to this ABSA Insight Series. I am Fifi Peters. In today's session, we turn our attention to the small and medium-sized businesses. SMEs have over the past years been flexing their muscles, contributing more to South Africa's economy. A study by the World Bank shows that formal SMEs contribute up to 40% of national income in emerging economies. But until they can secure a genuine foothold in corporate value chains, the sector is likely to be dominated by a handful of players who have had early mover advantage and access to finance. David Mparutsa, the head of enterprise and supply chain management at ABSA, joins me to unpack the value of SMEs. David, thanks so much for your time. Often banks are criticized for, not playing their part in helping SMEs gain greater access to finance. How have your lending practices towards SMEs changed in light of the call for banks to do more?
Yeah, thanks, and good afternoon, Fifi. So, I think the first thing that we've had to establish is really understand, why SMEs battle to get access to, finance or mainstream finance in the first place. And I think one of those key reasons is they typically lack strong balance sheet. A lot of lending, historic or traditional lending, as we call it, is on the back of a strong balance sheet, which a lot of SMEs don't have. So we've had to look at different and innovative ways, to finance SMEs, which does not really rely on them, having the ability to produce, strong collateral and to put that on the table. So, we've looked at different ways of funding SMEs, and the one way that we execute under enterprise and supply chain development is effectively funding those SMEs on the back of guaranteed cash flows that they have from corporate clients as well as public sector entities.
That's one way, and I suppose cash is king, and it's a way to see a sense of health amongst the businesses that you are extending lending to. What are some of the other innovative ways that you are looking at channeling funds towards SMEs as opposed to just looking at the standard measure of collateral?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, cash is king, and that's certainly one way. But other mechanisms that we have in place is really making use of data. So where we get reliable data, be it from FMCG companies where SMEs are distributing goods and services, basically understanding historic purchases that those SMEs make to FMCG companies. So really making use of data to be able to make financing decisions. You also find on the continent a lot of SMEs might not make use of traditional bank accounts and might make use of wallets, for instance, and really trying to get data from those wallets to be able to make a lending decision, because the cash flows that SME has is actually going through a wallet as opposed to going through a traditional bank account.
So the finance is one element of the equation, and the other being access to markets. To what extent is this within your ambit to provide as a bank?
Yeah, 100%, Fifi. So, you often find that it's actually not access to finance that's the biggest hurdle for SMEs. It's actually access to markets where, they need a marketplace to be able to sell their goods and services. So to assist them with this, we effectively partner with our corporate clients to enable them to localize their supply chains and provide procurement opportunities to SMEs as well as local entities. We then come in and provide the funding on the back of that once SMEs are given access to supply chain opportunities from corporate entities, and we provide the finance for that and provide that financing on a non-traditional way that doesn't look at collateral, but on the back of the cash flow from the corporate.
Mm. And in which areas on the continent have you released the greatest funds towards enterprise development? If you can just give us a bit of color of what you are doing in that space, and perhaps also what your targets are in that space.
Yeah, so what we've definitely picked up over the past couple of years is there's quite a strong local content narrative or strong local content legislation. Some might call it guidelines around the natural resources sector. So around, mining as well as oil and gas. And the bulk of our lending has certainly been into the sector. To give a few examples, we've got a partnership with Debswana in Botswana where, we're providing funding to their local contractors on jobs or types of work that were previously done by foreign-owned entities. Those jobs are now being given to local entities to do, and we're providing the financing on the back of that. In Ghana, we've just concluded a partnership as well with the Ghana Chamber of Mines to assist them with their supplier development program. So also with the same mandate of trying to get more local companies into the supply chains of these mining companies. And we work with various other mining companies across the continent, in Tanzania, in Zambia, as well as in Mozambique. So the mining or the natural resources sector is certainly where the bulk of our lending is going into. Secondly, we're also seeing that there is other sectors that are really starting to understand how they can use their own local procurement or their own procurement as a lever for economic growth. So, for instance, in the telco sector, we're working with Safaricom in Kenya. We're also doing work with Vodafone in Mozambique, and really financing a bulk of their local suppliers that are now getting access to mainstream supply chain opportunities. Also in the energy sector, we're working with the Rural Electrification Authority in Uganda, really assisting them with their mandate of improving electricity or access to electricity to underserved areas, and financing local contractors that have been given contracts to be able to put up this infrastructure. And then on the distributor side, also working with a lot of FMCG corporates in the fast mover consumer goods sector. We're working with the likes of Coca-Cola in Kenya, and this is now to provide financing to distributors, which help them basically move their goods from their factories basically to distribution points across the country. So really, it's in those sectors where we've had the most amount of success to date. In terms of your second question, Fifi, we really don't have a scale in terms of how much or a target in terms of how much we can actually lend to. So it's almost, if I can call maybe a bottomless pit, as long as, we've got a strong corporate offtake agreement, we've got an SME that's got the ability to do the job. We're trying to do as much lending as possible, and also ensuring that, we manage the risk around that lending to ensure, that we actually still have a responsible mandate towards our shareholders.
David, some of the sectors that you mentioned in which you are seeing more lending take place, one could make the argument that these are sectors that have in part benefited from this pandemic that we are presently still trying to fight off as a continent. Looking at what's happening in mining with the uptick in commodity prices, in telcos, with working from home, and with energy, with all forms of government announcements trying to accelerate the electrification on the continent. I'm interested in how you are viewing sectors that have not been winners from the pandemic, and who, for instance, have had their cash flows curtailed by the result of lockdowns that are limiting the ability to move around and the ability to travel. So if I'm an SME speaking to you or coming to ABSA from the travel and hospitality sector, for instance, you can't really look at my cash flows as a barometer for whether I'm a risky client or not, because I'm probably not even making any as a result of the lockdowns. How are you treating clients in that space?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one, and like we say, we're not only just trying to solve for access to finance. We're also trying to solve for access to to markets, as well as providing capacity building. So giving SMEs the relevant skills so they can grow their businesses from small businesses to medium size, and hopefully be the next future corporates in Africa. So, you've got to look at each case, in its own, and where, you find an SME that's, in an industry that's, really been hard hit as a result of COVID, it might be more of an advisory role that you're going to play to that SME. And it could be, maybe advising them to repivot their business to a sector that is doing well. And, SMEs, because of, their smaller size and structures, have the ability to be able to pivot very quickly and become a supplier into an industry or a sector that's predominantly doing well. So it's not really that, we're only trying to solve for, for access to finance. Sometimes putting finance into a sector that's not doing particularly well will only have one result. And, we have a very strong mandate to lend responsibly. So in those instances, it's potentially trying to link, those SMEs with corporates that are doing well and in sectors that, have not had too much of a negative impact, from the COVID-19 pandemic.
Before the pandemic, there's a lot of difficulty that a lot of female-owned businesses experienced in accessing finance, and we have seen that the pandemic has fallen harder on female-led businesses, kind of widening the funding gap towards this space, which presently does run into the trillions of rands. So as a bank, how are you trying to plug the gaps here by way of improving access to finance for female-led businesses as well as access to markets?
Yeah, Fifi, so I think in support of the Sustainable Development Goals around reduced inequalities, around equal opportunity, we've really been trying to figure out, how we can, improve access to finance, for women-owned businesses. And, one of the things that we are doing is working with, again, our corporate partners to be able to achieve this. We've got one particular program in Kenya with Safaricom, and this program does have a women in business component that's linked to that, where, the corporate Safaricom is actually starting to give, procurement opportunities for historically male-led services, such as fiber installation, for one, and actually giving some of those procurement opportunities to women-owned businesses because they have an equal ability to be able to deliver on those contracts. So, for us, it's then to come in and provide the financing to those women-owned businesses, as well as ensure that we can provide platforms for them to network, to learn from each other, as well as to build the necessary skills, to be able to grow their businesses and become mainstream suppliers in some of these massive value chains.
All right. David, it's good to know. And yes, that was a biased question. My conflict of interest declared. But we'll leave it there for now. Thanks so much for your time. That was David Mparutsa, the Head of Enterprise and Supply Chain Management at ABSA, joining us on the latest ABSA Insight Series. That's all we do have time for on today's program. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, goodbye.